Hello, and welcome to Only the Parts You Need, a GURPS podcast. In this episode, I would like to take a look at the first volume of a book series that is rarely ever mentioned, Creatures of the Night. This book series is probably the closest thing to a monster manual that GURPS gets, and it contains 5 volumes, at least at the time of this recording. I will give every monster a rate of F to A, using the following criteria. 1. Versatility. A versatile monster can be used in different situations, play different roles in adventures and encounters, while a non-versatile monster usually has a very narrow niche. 2. Style. This is the degree to which the monster's lore and appearance appeals to me. Basically, this is a very subjective cool factor. 3. Mechanics. Does it have any interesting or unique abilities? How well do they synergize with each other? Anything missing from the stat block? 4. Ease of use. Does this monster require a lot of setup? Can it be used well in fantasy games, modern games, or sci-fi games? The first monster in the first volume is Grider, also known as the Grave Worm. It is an underground dwelling transparent worm 20 to 40 feet in length that senses corpses, tunnels toward them, devours them with anything else that was in the grave, then retreats to digest them. It does not have any attacks, but has a defensive mechanism, a mind-numbing aura that decreases the IQ attribute. But here's the thing to think about. The description says that the Grider turns this aura on when it senses any creature larger than a house cat. But since the worm comes to the surface only once a year to reproduce, how often does it use this aura? One of the suggested encounters implies that Griders can be found by accident when digging new graves, but would an IQ decrease discourage the grave digger from attacking the worm? The worm does not possess any extraordinary sensory abilities to perceive living beings on the surface while it is underground, so it would not use the aura when somebody walks over it. I think give this creature vibration sense with the environmental ground would be a good idea. Speaking of the lack of attacks, you would think that such a large worm would be good at trampling, but no. First, slams require you to roll against dexterity or brawling to hit, but this monster has DX4. Good luck even with an all-out attack. However, it has a size modifier +3 to +6, so it should overrun and trample without an attack roll when fighting SM+1 or smaller characters. However, slam damage is based on HP, and the worm has HP 4 to 10. Why does a 3-ton worm have 10 HP while it has strength 40? I don't really know. The Grider also has easy to kill 4, so maybe it's not a grave worm but 1 foot in a grave worm. Things get better if you use the slam rules from the Dungeon Fantasy RPG, where it is based on striking strength instead of HP. The monster also seems to lack some traits such as no legs slithers, double jointed, injury tolerance, maybe horizontal too. You know, the worm traits. That's an oversight in my opinion. The corpse diet is not represented in the stat block either. Another problem is interacting with the monster. Since it rarely goes above ground, it is difficult to even notice. If it eats all the corpses in the graveyard, you will not know about this unless you decide to rob the graves. Mausoleums are a different case, but the worm will probably be long gone to digest when the PCs arrive. The monster does not really work by itself, and it has to be paired up with something or someone else. One of the adventure seeds is having a sorcerer capture a Grider and use it to lower the PC's will to have easier time enslaving them. While this does sound cool, how does the sorcerer himself avoid the mind-numbing aura of the Grider? I guess he could set things up in a way that the PCs are inside the area of effect, but he himself is not. But that's an extremely convoluted setup worthy of a Bond villain. There are some cool things about the Grider though. For example, you can see the treasure inside of it when fighting it, just like a gelatinous cube. Also, resurrection and zombie spells cast on corpses that are freed from a grinder are much easier to cast and or more effective. However, you'd need to fight a grinder that hasn't finished digesting his food. I guess it would be possible to lure a grinder with a dead body of your party member, then slay the beast and resurrect the body. Convoluted but cool. Here's how I'd rate this monster. Versatility F. This is a very niche monster that can be used only in a very specific way. Style C. I am giving it this grade mostly because I have soft spot for worm monsters and for the resurrection shenanigans. Mechanics D. The mind-numbing aura is mildly interesting, even if not very effective. The corpse sense probably should have the long-range 1 enhancement. A lot of traits seem to be missing. Ease of use F. Again, this monster is very difficult to use effectively. In normal combat it will be dead after a single hit. It needs to be coupled with someone else to be effective and requires supernatural powers to exist in the world. So it is probably only useful for fantasy games, and even there it is not at all easy to use. The Guardian Owl is a human wizard who decided to transform himself into an owl to protect another person. His personality is retained, but his spellcasting abilities and speech are lost. You might think, how does this help to protect the world? But just the presence of the Guardian Owl within half a mile gives the world regeneration, regrowth, and unkillable 2. The Guardian Owl also is able to sense any activity within half a mile, control animals within that area, and read their memories. I can see some situations where a wizard would choose to become such a guardian. It is also suggested to let the owl transform back into the human form for a day, but only once. This might be risky, but it also increases the interactivity of the creature, as it becomes able to speak and cast spells again. Could also give the PCs a quest. Overall, the Guardian Owl is more of a passive protector, because it cannot really do much in combat with its low strength. And if it dies in combat, it makes the world vulnerable again. However, the monster has fanaticism, protecting ward, which makes it difficult not to engage in dangerous combat situations when the world is concerned. If the area has large animals, such as bears, then mind control might be more effective than engaging in combat personally. Things become more interesting if the ward has an ability to speak with animals, be it an advantage or a spell. This mitigates the inability of the Guardian Owl to speak, turning the creature into a great information gathering and scouting ally. Here's how I'd rate this monster. Versatility B. This monster is quite versatile. It can be a guardian of an NPC, like in the investigation scenario written up as an adventure seed, prompting the PCs to solve a mystery. It could be an ally taken as a PC as well, or it could be a PC itself. It could serve as an adversary, being the reason behind seemingly dead enemies coming back to life and causing problems. The Guardian Owl can have different forms as well, another animal, an object or a structure, and the word can be not a person but an object, place, or even an idea. That's a great adventure versatility, but in combat the owl cannot really do much interesting. Style C. While the abilities are cool, it's still just an owl visually, with nothing extraordinary to set it apart. Mechanics B. The abilities are moderately interesting and they synergize with each other. The owl can sense activity, send a mind-controlled animal to gather information, then read the intel from its mind. Ease of use C-. The monster requires some setup to use, as you have to come up with an interesting backstory about a wizard transforming himself into a guardian owl. Moreover, you will probably need some generic animal statistics, the word itself, and you always have to keep in mind that the guardian owl can detect intruders and other activity with a pair roll, even if not present. Rules for offline enemies complicate things further. The monster can probably only be used in fantasy games. The Hariat is a tiny demon made of flame that grants people status and wealth in exchange for a gradual decrease in appearance, and she's addicted to it as well. So, basically she belongs to the Deal Demon archetype. In terms of combat capabilities, there is nothing to talk about, because she will literally die to a vacuum cleaner or a fly swatter. This is more of a plot device than a combatant after all. Here's how I'd rate this monster. Versatility D. This is almost exclusively a behind-the-scenes monster that manipulates a certain wealthy adversary. However, it could also act as an object that the characters are tasked with acquiring. Or there's a possibility of basing an adventure on breaking the curse that the Hariat afflicts on somebody. As for combat versatility, there is nothing to talk about. Style C. A tiny flaming feminine demon that manipulates somebody behind the scenes is a moderately interesting concept, but still nothing to write home about. Mechanics D. The signature ability to make people successful at the cost of their appearance is just a plot device that is not started up as an actual ability, which is disappointing. Ease of use B. This monster is incredibly easy to use if occult elements are present in the game world. In a low-tech fantasy game, it could be behind a king or a merchant. In a modern game, it could be attached to the CEO of large corporations. And the same goes for sci-fi games with supernatural elements. Letherians are people covered in tattoos from head to toes. They attract supernatural forces wherever they go. Letherians are not born, but made from normal humans who want to extend their lifespan and gain some other abilities. The transformation process involves tattooing using toxic ink, and the Letherians in general have an affinity for poisons. They even have to consume normally toxic substances as food. Treated as freaks, they live in the slums, usually alone, since their abilities become wild when there are other Letherians nearby. They also have a rivalry with vampires, with whom they have quite a lot in common. Here's how I'd rate this monster. Versatility B. Well, their stat blocks do not force them into any niche. They can be PCs, NPCs, allies or adversaries. They can have any abilities of any kind. However, they have hefty reaction penalties and cannot work well together with others of their kind, which somewhat limits them. Style C. The concept of tattooed humans who make latent abilities of others come to the surface does not excite me much. However, their dietary requirements are pretty cool. Mechanics A. Their abilities are interesting and work together well. I have no complaints. Ease of use C. On one hand, Letherians can fit easily into settings of any tech level, especially ones with hidden magic. On the other hand, they require a lot of work to use. They have a highly modified mana enhancer, weirdness magnet, and some of them have wild talent with wild ability as well, making them a hassle for the GM. Nurlocs are undead creatures that dwell underground. Usually they travel in groups and attack whoever descends into their domain, but sometimes they venture onto the surface to kidnap living victims to feed to their sleeping god. To accomplish this, they paralyze their prey with poison that coats their claws. In combat, they deal pathetic damage that will be easily negated by pretty much any armor. Their brawling skill is high enough to target unarmored body parts, and them traveling in great numbers helps to overwhelm their potential prey. Here's how I'd rate this monster. Versatility C. The Nurlocs can probably only serve as enemies, and they require the GM to have an environment with significant underground networks. In addition, for Nurlocs to be effective enemies that justify their scary flavor, they should be either used in low-tech games or high-tech games where the characters are not wearing any armor and have barely any weapons, sort of like an horror movie scenario. On TL9 or higher, even the worst concealable armor that is expected to be worn by practically everyone makes the Nerlux completely not dangerous. Style C. I do not find Nerlux very interesting, but they are not offensively boring either. Mechanics D. First, the description states that the Nerlux require no food, water, or sunlight, while the template does not have any of these traits. Second, the template has the Night Vision 7 feature, an accessory that provides light. The description only states that this light is enough to illuminate the face of the monster, but does not give any numbers, which seems to be on our side. Third, their poison requires 5 doses to work, which makes it significantly less effective than normal. The poison in the template requires 5 doses minus 10%, which seems to be way too low of a value. There's some interesting rules on making strength rolls while paralyzed to be able to speak and do some other minor actions, and it's the only thing that prevents me from grading it as F. Ease of use C. Again, this monster requires some setup, and since they are effective only in large numbers, you and your players should be intimately familiar with combat. Otherwise, your encounters are likely to grind to a halt when you throw 10 Nerlux at the PCs. The Pool Beast, unlike the preceding monster, takes up only a single page. This is a simple dungeon monster that does not have much in terms of ecology or background information. It just lurks in a pool of blood, then pops out when something comes within reach and bites it. Nothing else to say. Here's how I'd rate this monster. Versatility D. The only thing this monster can do is make surprise attacks against the adventuring party. And once they encounter another blood pool, the attack stops being a surprise. Style C. Nothing spectacular, but nothing offensively boring either. I wish it had some interesting lore behind it though. Mechanics C. Doesn't breathe in the template seems like it is missing a limitation. Gills, for example. Also, the description says that the pool beast senses upcoming prey that is outside of the pool with its vibration sense, while the template says vibration sense water. This should have probably had universal plus 50% instead to be able to cross interfaces. The illustration makes me think that peripheral vision was forgotten as well. Ease of use D. This monster isn't easy to use. While it does not bring any new or complicated rules to the table, the encounter location requires a lot of work to make the pool beast threatening. The Ptallant lizard is very interesting. This is a lizard that is created as a byproduct of a critically failed roll to cast an Earth College spell. While it cannot really harm anyone physically, it can cause earthquakes by slapping its tail against the ground. The description talks about the Ptallant lizard's origin, a possible adventure hook, and variants based on other colleges. Here's how I'd rate this monster. Versatility A. This monster can serve as a random encounter, a subplot caused by a player character miscasting a spell, a living tool for the character, or even the crux of an adventure. Earthquakes being dangerous phenomena makes it relevant on any TL. Style B. I find the concept to be very good. Not something stellar that blows my mind, but definitely above the average. Mechanics B. The Ptallant lizard has its signature ability statted out in the template, and I like it a lot, because it can be used to extrapolate what kind of effects controlled tremors can create. However, there's two small things that prevent me from giving it an A. First, I think the control advantage should have nuisance effect, cannot concentrate to extend duration, minus 10%. Second, as you do not have the ability cost, you do not really know what rarity Tremors has for the control advantage. Do you think it's occasional, common or rare? Honestly, I do not know. I actually live in a seismically active region where we experience earthquakes quite often, but I still do not know what rarity I would assign to this phenomenon. I'm leaning toward occasional. Ease of use D. This monster is actually quite difficult to use because there is just so much wrong that can go, for example, when an earthquake is triggered in a city. The Shoulder Giant is a humanoid monster who tunnels through the earth to find a building to live under. He finds a structural weakness where he goes into hibernation, only awakening once a month or during a thunderstorm. A Shoulder Giant stirring causes a building above to shake. Here's how I'd rate this monster. Versatility D. The concept just does not lend to much versatility. However, there's some adaptation notes such as transforming the Shoulder Giant into a golem, or transforming others into Shoulder Giants as a curse, which makes things a bit better. Style D. Not a fan of this one. Just feels kind of bland, and the description explains why the giant prefers structural weaknesses with because it does. Just does not feel right to me. Mechanics B. The template is solid, and it also uses a rarely used modifier, Super Effort. In addition, we now know what rarity structural weakness has. Ease of use B. The game world must have supernatural elements, but other than that, the Shoulder Giant can be used at any TL in any game. The only complicated rule it brings to the table is Super Effort on its lifting ST. The Slake Hound is very cool. A dog-sized alien-looking hound with a very nasty bite. It feeds on bodily fluids of humans and animals that it drains via grappling spines that grow on its back. The fluids it drains are processed in the special bile organ. Should this bile organ be ruptured, it causes severe bleeding and also squirts acid all over the place, turning the Slake Hound into a walking bomb. This organ can be harvested and used as a grenade or a component for acidic enchantments. I like this one a lot. Here's how I'd rate this monster. Versatility B. These hounds can be used as enemies, resources, and allies, just like the sample adventure seed implies. That adventure, while simplistic, is pretty interesting in my opinion. However, in combat the Slake Hounds are not very versatile, just ganging up on the enemies and draining them dry. Style A. I like everything about this monster, aside from its goofy hooves. Mechanics B. Where are the hooves on the template? Also, while the corrosive organ attack is very interesting, it being activated on the bile organ getting ruptured is not represented in the ability. However, it could be a variant of Uncontrollable, where stress is replaced with injury. Leech, only working through grappling spines and taking time to circumvent armor, are not represented as a stat block. I think it's also missing injury tolerance no neck, looking at the illustration. Ease of use B. Using this monster is relatively easy, as the only complex thing it brings to the table is Leech. The corrosion attack is quite straightforward, and there are no limitations on the TL. The abilities can be justified as mundane, so even supernatural elements are not mandatory. Telonodes are something like plants or fungi that appear around a place where people live, then telepathically feed all the secrets of the entire community to the people who live in the dwelling they encircle. They are invisible to everyone but the so-called insiders who are fed the secrets, or until somebody bumps into them. There's also several notes on how to adapt or change the telonodes for certain genres or game types. Honestly, this is more of a plot device than a monster, something you'd see in a Torchwood episode or something like that. Here's how I'd rate this monster. Versatility D-. Despite the adaptation notes, this creature only works in a very specific scenario and plays a single role. Style F. There's no wow factor for me here at all. Mechanics B. The monster has a lot of abilities and all of them are represented in the stat block. However, there's nothing in the stat block that represents the gradual loss of secrets when enough insiders leave the circle. The power modifiers are missing, but that's probably intentional because the origins sidebar describes multiple different power sources. Interestingly enough, the telonodes are not blind or deaf. Ease of use D. While the Talonauts can be easily used in any TL and genre, they require the GM to work out a lot of the different secrets the NPCs might possess. Basically, the Talonauts become a linchpin of the adventure, if not a campaign. Lastly, we have the Uroth. Uroths are alien-looking grazing animals with tentacles instead of their faces. They swallow rocks, eat whatever soil and bugs there are on them, then spit them out, unless this is a precious gemstone, gold or silver. If it dies due to this metal poisoning, natural causes, or is killed, it slowly turns into stone in a matter of 2 weeks. They do not really have any interesting attacks, just a kick, a weak bite, and stampede, but they provide a lot of opportunities for adventure. One can hunt Uroths to gather gemstones, metals, or magic items that are stuck in their stomachs, or one can carve up the dead petrified Uroths to do the same thing. Cool! Here's how I'd rate this monster. Versatility, C. The Uroths can serve only 2 roles, a straightforward enemy or a mount. Tactically, it does not provide much, just kicks and slams. Style, B. This monster shows that you can make a very cool monster even without convoluted supernatural abilities. Mechanics, B. The template is solid, there's an interesting variation of acute vision, but I think fur and restricted diet are missing. Ease of use, A. Very easy to use. While they fit fantasy settings better, there's nothing preventing you from using it as an alien animal in a sci-fi game, or something like that. So I think that's it. I had fun writing this, and I hope that you had a good time listening to this. This is an experimental episode, but if people like these and want more, I might review the rest of the Creature of the Night series this way.